So today we're talking about something that is somewhat controversial because the data suggests an outcome that may make a lot of people feel uncomfortable. And that's why I think it's important to have this conversation. And that is the economics of thinness and the perception of women leaders and their physical stature and attributes being correlated to how successful they are as a leader.
Yeah, so our team's group chat was hot when Nuvyn found this article in The Economist. It's called The Economics of Thinness. And the author offers an interesting argument that career-driven women can't afford to overlook the economic implications of their appearance. So I have a statistic from that article that overweight or obese women are paid less than their thinner peers. The penalty for an obese woman is significant, costing her about 10% of her income. So I actually also then found a Times article on workplace bias that noted gaining 25 pounds could correlate with losing roughly $14,000 in annual salary.
And how does that compare to similar data for our male colleagues?
Well, I also researched that, obviously, and it's very gendered. So men don't face the same penalties. So men who happen to gain 25 pounds don't experience the same kind of hit to their earnings as women do.
So in some of these interesting articles, particularly the one in The Economist and the one in Times Magazine, and I know the one from The Economist has recently been updated to have a sidebar on the economics of thinness in the era of Ozempic, which also is fascinating, and I'd encourage our listeners to check that out. But there is a direct correlation between a woman's weight and her income. And when we think about perceptions of leadership and even role modeling and that physical attribution, what does that look like? How do we perceive the qualities of a leader?
So what's the visual that we have when we think woman CEO? What does she look like? And I think that can also connect to these sort of unspoken norms around how women dress themselves, how we're expected to look, how we're expected to present ourselves. And of course, I'm going to make everything about finances, but there is a financial implication of that when as it relates to the money we spend on how we look. So whether that's a gym membership, whether that's, what you eat, how you eat, or we have to have our hair done, we have to have makeup on, we have to have outfits. And that financial burden and the expectation is compounded when you consider intersectionality. So women of color and things like that.
It's probably not that helpful when we use phrases like dress for the job that you want, not the job that you have,
Yeah,
right?
that's so true.
What are we reinforcing there? Look good and you'll get ahead. You'll advance your career.
And I think that COVID was helpful in, I have observed that wearing sneakers on the job is so acceptable now. Wearing jeans in a podcast interview is totally cool. So I'm hoping there is, and this is anecdotal and it's, a sample size of one, but I'm hoping that there is kind of a movement towards wear what makes you comfortable, wear what you enjoy, dress like your personality. But the data isn't necessarily showing that.
Yeah. And I think as people, as society thinks about the qualities of a leader, and we talk about those from a virtuous standpoint in terms of being, whether it's like the leaders eat last mantra or being accessible, vulnerable, providing direction, we overlook the blatant fact that there is a physical attribution of leadership. People look to someone and assume that they are a leader if they look a certain way and if they carry themselves a certain way. And if they have a certain weight, as clearly demonstrated by the data from The Economist and from Times.
And I think there is still that, historical expectation that there is somebody at home doing the uncomfortable, the unpaid work for you. And so that is kind of pulled into our leadership expectations in a modern era where, you would have time to do your hair in the morning. You wouldn't have to, drive your kid to school or whatever that might be. And I personally think people still think that. Like I have my own wife that is doing. I do think people still think that. Yeah, I do. And so I don't know about you. Mornings are so hard. Curling your hair in the morning is the last thing I'm thinking about. But
Right.
I do think there is an expectation that you have all the time to do that and that's how you should be presented.
Yeah, I think that people certainly will look towards how someone looks and make an assumption based on where they are in the pecking order of an organization. I don't know if people make the correlation that it's because you have help at home that then provides you with the time to do that. I think it's just we keep our shit together.
Right.
But really, it's
We
total
do it
chaos.
because it's expected of us.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's some other interesting data that I was thinking about as I was reflecting on the article in The Economist, and that is the correlation between physical activity and teams and what we know about women in positions of leadership and their role in team sports. And I think there was one stat that said it was either 88 or 91% of women in the C-suite and above participated in some form of physical sport and team sport growing up. And I wonder if there's perhaps now I'm really drawing conclusions here, if there perhaps is a correlation then between not just the aspects that you learn about being part of a team in terms of like motivation and support and camaraderie and working hard, but also that you were part of a physical sport that had a very demanding, physical, what am I trying to say? Like requirements in order to be successful. And if that hasn't carried over into your professional life as well.
Yeah, I remember that that quote. I think it might even be higher than 91%, but I agree, and I think team sports have many benefits. I think for women, part of that is like building a community too, and so it teaches you to build community. It teaches you what is acceptable, where you can maybe push the boundaries, and maybe that's part of it too. Is that team sports help you kind of figure out your ability to push boundaries.
One of the reasons why I love this podcast is because we may not have all the answers, but at least we're raising awareness and focusing on issues that ought to be considered. And when I came across this article, it kind of caught me off guard.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that before. And then it challenged my own assumptions about how I view leadership and the qualities associated with that, and made me uncomfortable. So I wanted to talk about it today.
And we're so deep in sort of the gender dynamics of the workplace that sometimes we lose sight of that intersectionality or the other complicating factors that could be influencing our audience.
So share your thoughts, let us know, read the article, tell us your feedback. The Quiet Part Out Loud is produced by Access Connects and brought to you by, oh wait, is there a sponsorship opportunity there? Learn more at accessconnects.com.